My name is Mila, and I'm 30 years old. At one point, I thought my life was set, that I'd finally found my path toward happiness, but life has a way of taking unexpected turns. What I once believed was a blessing turned into a nightmare, and now, as I reflect on everything, I can see how blind I was to the truth that had been staring me in the face all along. I met my husband, Oliver, 6 years ago when we both worked at the same hotel. He wasn't just any man. Oliver was the heir to a family-owned, prestigious classic hotel known for its rich history and long-standing traditions. He had come to our urban hotel to learn modern hospitality practices, as his family's hotel had fallen behind the times. As part of my job, I was assigned to train him. I was nervous. He was the only son of a wealthy hotelier, and I wondered if I could handle training someone like him. But to my surprise, he was humble, quick to learn, and before long, I realized I wasn't just a mentor to him anymore. I never imagined I'd fall in love with him, but he was charming, with a quiet confidence that drew me in. Within 3 months, he asked me out, and I hesitated at first. We were from different worlds after all, but something about Oliver made me feel safe, as though he could protect me from anything. A year later, his training was over, and he was preparing to return to his family's hotel. My heart sank. I thought I'd have to say goodbye, but one night, he asked me something that took me by surprise. "I can't leave you behind," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Will you come with me?" I agreed, even though a small voice in the back of my mind warned me to think carefully. I had already been through a failed marriage before. Could I risk it all again? Still, love blinded me. We got married soon after, and I left my job and moved into Oliver's family home. At first, it felt like a dream come true. The hotel was a grand, old structure, steeped in history, and his parents, Ethan and Isabella, ran it like a well-oiled machine. Ethan was the quiet but firm manager, while Isabella was his sharp, business-minded deputy. From the beginning, though, I could feel the weight of expectations pressing down on me. Oliver was the heir, and with that came an unspoken demand for an heir of our own. Isabella wasted no time in reminding me of that fact. "Mila, I expect to see a grandchild soon," she would say at every opportunity. Her words seemed casual at first, but over time they began to take on a more demanding tone. At first I didn't mind. I wanted children too. But as the months passed, Oliver became more distant. His work consumed him, and when we were together, he seemed distracted. At night, when I reached out to him, he would turn away, claiming he was too tired. I told myself it was just stress from his work. After all, he was slowly taking over responsibilities from his father. But then, 6 months went by, and then a year. Still, no pregnancy. Isabella's questions became sharper, her once polite inquiries turning into harsh criticism. "A year and still no child?" she'd say, narrowing her eyes at me. "What are you even doing as a housewife?" Her words stung, but I tried to keep calm. I wanted to give her a grandchild, but it wasn't happening. Oliver wasn't helping either. He would brush off my concerns and spend more time at the hotel, leaving me alone in the large family home. The more time passed, the more distant he became. I tried to convince myself it was just the stress of managing the hotel, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't until one afternoon, when Isabella's comments grew especially cruel, that I started to suspect something more. "You should get tested," she snapped, her tone icy. "Maybe there's something wrong with you." I agreed, thinking it might help ease the pressure if I could prove there wasn't anything wrong with me. When I told Oliver about it later that night, expecting his support, he shrugged it off. "Why should I go? It's not me. It's you," he said, his words cutting deeper than I expected. How could he be so sure? How could he be so cold? The tests were grueling. Blood tests, ultrasounds, and invasive procedures that left me exhausted both physically and emotionally. But when the results came back, the doctor's face held a look of surprise. "There's no issue with you," she said, flipping through the test results. "We can't be sure without testing your husband, but from what we can see, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to conceive." My heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Could the issue lie with Oliver? but getting him to come to the clinic would be next to impossible. He was so certain the problem was with me, so dismissive of the possibility that it could be anything else. I returned home that evening, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. I wanted to confront Oliver, but he wasn't home. As usual, he was working late. I sat at the dining table, replaying the doctor's words over and over in my mind. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I couldn't focus. In the afternoon, I decided to take a walk to clear my head, and that's when I saw him. Oliver. He was standing on the street corner, talking to a woman I didn't recognize. They were laughing, and then, as I watched in disbelief, the woman took his arm. They walked down the street together, disappearing around the corner. My heart raced. Who was she? What was Oliver doing? I felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. I followed them. I don't know what I was hoping to find, but something inside me needed answers. They walked into a hotel together, and that's when my world shattered. Oliver was cheating on me. I stood there, frozen, staring at the hotel entrance. My husband, the man I thought I loved, the man who had promised me a future, was betraying me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I wanted to run after them, to confront him, to scream. But I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and all I could do was stand there, watching as the truth I had refused to see for so long came crashing down around me. That night, Oliver didn't come home. I sat in the dark, waiting, hoping he would walk through the door, that he would have some explanation, some excuse. But he didn't. The next day, I returned to the hospital for a follow-up appointment. The doctor confirmed what I had feared. "The issue isn't with you," she said. "It's your husband." The weight of those words settled over me like a heavy blanket. It wasn't my fault. It had never been my fault. But what could I do with that information? How could I confront Oliver now, knowing what I knew about his affair? When I returned home, Isabella was waiting for me, as she always was. "Well? What did the doctor say? How long until we have a grandchild?" I stared at her, feeling the rage and sadness boil up inside me. I wanted to scream, to tell her everything, to tell her that her precious son was the one who couldn't have children, that he was the one who had betrayed me. But I couldn't bring myself to say the words. Instead, I lied. "The doctor said it might be due to stress," I mumbled, avoiding her piercing gaze. "Stress?" she scoffed. "You're a housewife. What stress could you possibly have?" I couldn't take it anymore. The anger was building, and I was on the verge of breaking, but I held it in. I wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. That night, Oliver finally came home. He acted like nothing was wrong, like everything was normal. He kissed me on the cheek and mumbled something about work before heading upstairs to bed. I stood there in the kitchen, gripping the counter so tightly my knuckles turned white. I knew I had to confront him, but the words wouldn't come. How do you accuse your husband of cheating, of being the reason you can't have children, when he spent the past year blaming you for it? Days turned into weeks, and I continued to live in that awful, suffocating limbo. But the more I thought about it, the angrier I became. I had to know the truth about everything. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. It didn't take long for the investigator to find out what I had suspected. Oliver had been cheating on me for months, and it wasn't just with one woman. He had been seeing multiple women, using work as an excuse to cover his tracks. But that wasn't the worst part. The investigator also found Oliver's ex-wife, Charlotte. I had always been told that Charlotte had left Oliver and taken their child with her, but the truth was much darker. Charlotte had left because Oliver had been unfaithful to her as well, and she hadn't taken their child. She had taken a child from her current husband, leaving Oliver behind with no heirs. It was all a lie. Armed with this new information, I reached out to Charlotte. I needed to hear her side of the story, and I needed her help. To my surprise, she agreed to meet with me. We sat in a quiet cafe and she told me everything. "Oliver was always charming at first," she said, stirring her coffee absently. "But it didn't take long for his true nature to show. He cheated on me constantly, and when I couldn't get pregnant, His mother blamed me for everything. I nodded, feeling a bitter sense of déjà vu. Her story was eerily similar to mine. I couldn't take it anymore, Charlotte continued, so I left. But I didn't take his child. That child is my current husband's. The pieces finally fell into place. Oliver wasn't just infertile. He had lied to me from the very beginning, using his ex-wife's child as proof that he wasn't the problem. I was furious. Not only had he betrayed me, but he had also built our entire relationship on lies. Together, Charlotte and I devised a plan. We would confront Oliver and Isabella, but not in the way they expected. We would show them the truth, expose them for what they had done, and make sure they understood the pain they had caused. A few days later, Charlotte and I arrived at the hotel, pretending to be guests. We booked a room and waited for the right moment. When Isabella saw us, her face turned pale. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her eyes darting between us. "We came to see you," I said, my voice steady. "There's something you need to know." Oliver appeared a moment later, his expression unreadable. "What's going on?" he asked, his tone cold. I took a deep breath and looked him in the eye. "The infertility is your fault, Oliver. The doctor confirmed it." His face went white, but before he could respond, I continued. "And your ex-wife didn't take your child. That child isn't even yours." For a moment, there was silence. Then Isabella's face twisted in rage. "How dare you?" she screamed, stepping toward me. "You're lying." But the truth was undeniable. Oliver had no heir, and the family's legacy, the thing they had held over me for so long, was crumbling before their eyes. Charlotte and I left the hotel that day, feeling a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. Oliver and Isabella were left to deal with the consequences of their actions, and as word spread through the town, their hotel's reputation began to fall apart. As for me, I found peace with Lucas, the man who had been there for me through everything. We built a life together, free from the lies and deceit that had plagued my past. And now, as I hold my daughter in my arms, I can finally breathe again. The shadows of my past no longer haunt me, and I know I am exactly where I am meant to be.